Hey, welcome to our Bible study. We are studying from the book of Romans, chapter 1. Previous to this, we had one installment where we covered chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. So if you missed that out, what you can do is you can go to our YouTube channel, click under the videos tab, and you can rewatch that study. Today, we are continuing from verse 18, finishing off into verse 32 of Romans chapter 1. So I want to encourage you to grab a notepad so you can take some notes and grab your Bible so that you can follow along with me this evening. If you have not done it yet, hit that share button, hit that like button, and hit that subscribe button. Let's jump into today's study. So we're going to Romans chapter 1, and we're reading from verse 18, all right? So it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." So Paul is going to talk about sin now. Now, we covered in our last session the background of the book of Romans, how it was written, who it was written to, the culture of that time, especially in Rome. Now, he's writing to the Romans, the Gentiles, and he's addressing sin. Now, he's addressing sin for both the Romans and for the Jews, because the Jews taught themselves as well to be chosen, and because of the fulfillment of the law, they expected that they were made saved under the law. So he's addressing the sin issue that regardless of if you are under the law or if you're a Gentile and you never even heard of the law, we all have sin. So he's addressing some of the sin issues specific to the Roman culture. Now, I will say this in advance as we continue into this study this evening. There's a lot about the Roman culture that is very similar to our culture in Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, the Western Hemisphere. That means we're going to target some things today when we talk about sin from the book of Romans, from the writing of Paul, that will be offensive to the progressive culture. So in our progressive culture, we push, well, I shouldn't say we, not the church, outside of the church, our culture that is satanic, that is rooted in evil, pushes a lot of teachings and thoughts that today in the book of Romans, Paul is addressing upfront as actually saying it's sin. So he says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." And we live in that generation where men suppress the truth. Men and women, men, I mean mankind, we know what the truth is. We know in our hearts what is moral, what is right, what is truthful, but yet we suppress that truth for sin. And we're going to get some more into that today, some of the truths in our society that we suppress so that we can indulge in sin. Verse 19, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them." Now, this is important. He's saying that for the ungodly, for those that do not know Jesus, that the truth of God is still made plain to them. So for someone who has never read the Bible, the truth of God is still made plain known to them. For someone who has never heard the gospel message of Jesus via any social media platform, via a friend or family member telling them about Jesus, here's what Paul is saying. The truth of God has still been revealed and made plain to them. So you don't need to hear a preacher. You don't need to read the Bible to know that there is a truth, that there is a God, and even that who this God is, right? So here's what he says. "For his invisible attributes," because we cannot see God, "namely his eternal power and divine nature, has been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse." He's saying, for those who choose to serve other gods besides Yahweh, for those who choose to deny the existence of God as atheists and Scientologists, that you are suppressing the truth of who God is, because it is made clear in nature, in creation, not just that God exists, but who this God is. Let me explain a little bit further. So in creation, it is clear to see that there is an intelligent, all-powerful God that created all of the universe. Even the best scientific minds will debate the fact that the Big Bang Theory and the existence of reality would point towards a creator. It will point towards something intelligent forming everything into existence. The fact that everything in our world exists perfectly and is able to function. The fact that only on Earth, out of all the other planets that scientists have discovered, only on Earth life can exist because the sun is set exactly at the right proportion from the Earth, or should I say the Earth, according to science, is set directly the right distance from the sun. If the Earth was to move just a fraction off from the distance it is from the sun, we would freeze to death. If it was to move just a fraction closer to the sun, we will burn and cease to exist. This is how important it is to understand that someone that is intelligent created life form. Life form did not just burst into being. And even if you were to use the debate of the Big Bang Theory, the Big Bang Theory suggests that something at that creation point caused nothing to become something. And this is where we speak about the invisible God, creating out of nothingness, creating something. In nature, there points to creation. In our own existence as humans, we are able to procreate and bring life by partnering with God into this earth, which points to the fact that if we as creatures can create life through birth, then there must be something that has created us. Everybody asks themselves this question: how was I created? How did I come upon the face of the earth? Because creation points to a creator. That's the reality. Creation points to a creator. So he says the invisible attributes, namely the eternal power and divine nature, have clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. So just the fact that there is creation points to the fact that there is a creator. Now the discussion is, how do we know that it points to the creator being the God of the Bible? That's important now, because he's saying that they're without excuse. So a lot of people will say, yes, I believe in God, but I don't believe in the God of the Bible. I believe in another God. I believe in the God of sun, or I believe in the God of the moon, or I believe in the God of nature, or I believe in the universe, right? I don't believe in the God of the Bible, but I believe that there is a being that created all of existence. Here's what Paul is saying. Paul is saying that you are without excuse, because even in nature, it points to the God of the Bible. Now, how does it point to the God of the Bible? Firstly, he says that the eternal power and divine nature. So when we read about the God of the Bible and we look at creation, we can see that there must be one an all-knowing God that created all of the universe. Because the God that created the universe has to be more intellectual to be able to create something so majestic. So we see that the God of the universe has to be more intellectual, all-knowing. Secondly, we see that the God of the universe has to be all-powerful, because only an all-powerful being can actually, out of nothing, form something and then keep it in existence as well, because God still holds the entire universe in existence. He's the reason that the universe exists. Outside of God, the universe will not be able to be sustained, because his omnipotent power actually sustains the universe. So he has to be all-knowing, he has to be all-powerful, and he also has to be omnipresent. He has to be able to be in more than one places at the same time. In other words, he cannot be restricted by space and time. That if he was restricted by space and time, it means that he could not create the universe while forming the galaxies that exist, while putting human life on the earth, while doing all these things at the same time. He had to be able to be at more than one place at the same time, right? And it points to one God. Now you might say, well, how does the creation point to one God? When we look at the complexity of creation, there could not be many different gods that all work together to form this world. If there were many different gods, then it would not perfectly sync together as one. I want you to understand that. When we look at creation, there is this clarity that there is one mind that has created all of it. Now, you can think about a project. For example, building a vehicle. Building a car. A car has many different parts. But any vehicle has one specific manufacturer. That one specific manufacturer has designed the entire vehicle, and while different parts form that vehicle, it is one mind that created this vehicle to operate in perfect unison. Now, in our human capability, we have to share those resources to be able to make it work together. When we speak about all of creation, if there were many different gods creating the earth, one creating the sky, one creating the moon, then there will at some point be division. There cannot be perfect unity where there is many different minds. This is why when we speak about the Trinity of God, we say that we serve one God that has three different beings that exist as one. Now, there's three different persons that exist as one being, right? Three persons that exist as one being. This is important. One mind, which points to one God. Now, we have already eliminated a lot of doctrine there by saying that there is one God, right? So we eliminate all polytheistic religions, such as, for in this example with Paul, he is speaking to the church in Rome that believe in the pagan gods or the gods of the Romans, right? So he's eliminating those polytheistic teachings. In our nation, that would be eliminating some polytheistic teachings, such as Hinduism. Now that we're down to monotheism, one God, how do we know it's the God of the Bible versus not being the God of the Quran, right? How do we know this difference now? Or some other religion that is monotheistic? And the reason that we know the difference is that the God of the Bible perfectly aligns with creation. When we look at the description of creation from a biblical aspect, it shows us that out of nothing came everything. And this perfectly aligns with what scientists are now figuring out about creation. Like, they are now figuring out that all of creation comes from nothing. But the Bible already said that 2,000 years before scientists even had invented the technology to be able to discover these types of truths. Now, while it is clear through creation who God is, which God is the true God, yet men suppress that truth and they deny the truth of who God is. Now, like I said, you can be in a part of the world where you never heard about the Bible, you never heard about Jesus, but the fact that you see a God in creation, because you say, hey, there must be a God, and this has to be one God, and I start praying to that God, you are actually praying to God of the Bible. This is what I want you to understand. You are actually praying to the one God that actually does exist, because there is only one God. So if in the authenticity and purity of your heart, you are actually praying to this one God, because you see there must be a creator, then by extension, you are actually praying to the God of the Bible, right? So it tells us that the invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived even since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. Those who do not accept Jesus Christ are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking and their foolish hearts were darkened. So for those who reject Jesus, here's what. You have no excuse. You know that Jesus is God, but you choose to deny that truth. You choose to not honor God, to not give him thanks, to not acknowledge he is your creator, to not honor him by obeying biblical principles. You choose to not honor God in the foolishness of your own thinking and your own desires and in the darkness of your heart. This is what Paul is addressing to the church in Rome. In verse 22, it says, you claim to be wise. You claim to be wise. This is important. This is really the culture that we live in, right? You claim to be wise. You claim to be wise. They became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Okay, there's a shift here. So now he's actually directly targeting idolatry. Now, idolatry was very common in the Roman culture because, again, they had a polytheistic belief and they believed in many different gods and they worshipped idol gods. Now, when we speak about the word idol in this context, we are speaking about a physical image, a statue that is created to represent God and that it is worshipped in the place of God. Now, Paul is saying that you claim to be wise by saying, hey, I'm woke. I know who God is. I know who created me. You claim to be wise, but became fools in your claim to be wise by exchanging the glory of an immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Now, the idols that the pagans would worship in Rome would often be a combination of, it would look like a man plus a bird plus a lion plus an eagle. It would look like this combination of things that form together to make this idol, right? This is what it would have looked like. The imagery would have been a mixture. And what he's saying is that, well, for one, we know that for those that believe in the Bible, that we do not know what God looks like, the image of God. But what he's saying is even more detrimental. He's saying that you now exchange the glory of God, something immortal that we don't even know what it looks like, and substitute it with something ordinary, with something mortal, with something that was created by God. with all these different images that you created, that you put together to make this statue, and then you worship something that you created. Like, you are supposed to be worshiping the creator, but instead you create something and claim that that thing that you create is greater than you. Now, that sounds foolish. That sounds foolish. To think that something that you create with your own hands, with your own imagination, by taking things that, well, already exist because you didn't even make it up, right? You just take parts of what God created as a man, and parts of what God created as a bird, and parts of what God created as a lion, and parts of what God created as an eagle, and you just join them together, paint it in different colors, and then you start worshiping that thing that you just created. That can't be God. You just created it. And this is the problem that Paul has with the Romans, and this is a problem that we face in our culture. Creating gods out of our own imagination, out of our own craftsmanship, and then worshiping that thing and claiming that that thing is greater than us. And it says now that you've become foolish, because you've made images to resemble mortal man, birds and animals and creeping things. And verse 24, therefore, God gave them up to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonor of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So he's speaking directly about idolatry here. Serving the creature instead of the Creator. Right? Even serving the moon or the sun or the stars or, for example, the universe. You are replacing the truth of God for something that God has created. And verse 26 tells us, for this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchange natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with the passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their errors. Okay, so here's something important now. Here's what Paul is saying to the church. Paul is saying that because they chose to deny the existence of God, in the hardness of their heart, by them dishonoring God, God said he's giving them up unto their own desires. And one of these major issues now that comes to the forefront is homosexuality. The topic of homosexuality, when we talk about it today, which is something that we will have to tackle because this passage talks about it, when we speak about homosexuality, it's very important to understand that homosexuality is not a new idea. It is not a new thing that comes out of our progressive movement and out of us trying to be a more advanced society or to try to be more woke as a society. No, homosexuality is an old thing. Homosexuality is what happens before Christ came, when people did not want God and they chose their idols and they chose their false gods and they chose to deny the existence of God. And now as a society, we are actually coming back. We are going backwards. We're not moving forward. Like, the embracing of the LGBTQ movement is not us moving forward. It's actually us now going backwards to what it was like before Jesus came, before we had the truth of God, and men gave themselves over to all their lustful desires, all their sinful thoughts, and all their darkness that was on the inside. One of those things that is addressed here, not the only thing, but one of these things that are addressed in this passage is homosexuality. Homosexuality is not a new thing. Now, in the Roman culture, it was very common, homosexuality was a very common practice. It is actually believed that the emperor at this time, Nero, that he would have been married to a woman for the purpose of procreating for his lineage, right, for his kingship heritage, but he was also in a homosexual relationship with a man as well. It was very common in Roman practices that most times, older men would be in sexual relationships with young boys. It was a common practice in Roman times that young boys, when becoming of sexual awakening, would just give themselves over to anything. They would try all kind of different things. So they would be with boys, would be with boys would be with girls, boys would be with animals. They would be with different. They would do all kind of vile sexual acts as a form of awakening to discover sexuality. Because remember, without the law of God, there is lawlessness. And literally, that is what homosexuality in the time of Rome and even now represents. It represents denial of the truth of the law of God and giving over to anything else. So there's no law, There is no law, so you can do whatever. When we speak about, like, for example, if a country does not have a law that says you cannot commit murder, people will commit murder. Well, we have that law in Trinidad that you can't commit murder, but people still commit murder, right? But the point is that the law is meant to keep you or to stop you from doing something that is evil. Without the law, without the obedience unto God, without the truth of God being prevalent, the people give themselves over to all these lawlessness. And one of these topics that is addressed here is homosexuality. It says that men now give themselves over to other men. They go against, look at the wording that is used here, right? For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For the woman exchanged natural relations for this which is contrary to nature. So even in Roman time, it was a popular thinking that homosexuality was against nature. Why? Because in nature, a man and a woman coming together would then reproduce. So that seemed natural, that a man and woman would come together and reproduce. The reason that Paul uses this vernacular of it, they're going against their natural use of their body, is because a man and a man cannot reproduce. A man cannot naturally have sex with another man. They actually have to go against the natural functions of the male anatomy. Now, I don't want to get too gross in this session, but I want you to understand that this is what Paul is referring to. They are going against the nature of their body. Their body does not naturally have that capability to have sex within the two of the same gender, right? Two men cannot naturally have sex. It goes against the nature of their body, the actual function of the human anatomy. So he's saying that they're actually going against their nature. Why they're going against their nature? Because they deny what they see in nature. This is important. He starts off by saying that we have no excuse. We could see in nature that God exists. Now, when you deny through what you see in nature that God exists, you start going against what is natural. This is where now homosexuality comes into play. You want to deny that, hey, I don't believe that God has created men and women for each other. That does not seem natural to me. So therefore, I am going against nature, because if I was to accept that men and women are supposed to be together naturally, then I would be accepting the God of the Bible. So the only way to defy the God of the Bible is to defy my nature, my human nature. And we've even come to a place where we claim that our human nature is our evilness of our human nature is natural. So we try to now spin the truth, and we try to create this lie that, okay, you were created as a homosexual. This is who you are. This is who you were created to be. This is your inner being that is coming forth, and society is trying to deny who you are, and you can change genders because that's not who you were created to be. You weren't created to be a boy. You're created to be whoever you feel to be. Again, it is trying to deny the truth of nature, of who God says you are, for something that is within your own evil desires. And that is the place that our society has reached, where parents are teaching little boys that you can choose to be a girl, that you could get a surgery done at the age of 5. Like, I have a 2-year-old. He is not mature to make any decisions on his own. A parent's responsibility is to protect your child from what is evil, from what is sinful, from what is harmful. I'm not going to give my child a lighter to play with because he feels as though he wants to play with a lighter, and just say, well, okay, well, you were created to play with lighters. That's who you are in your inner being. You're I can't even remember the word right now for somebody that's addicted to fires, right? Pyro or something. But either way, the point is that we've come to a society now where parents are actually giving their children to do things that are evil instead of protecting their children. And that is a gross dishonor unto the privilege that God has given us as parents to partner with Him and to care for a child in this world, to then dishonor God by allowing our children to do things that are harmful to them, to do things that they would regret in the long run. So, in verse 28, it says, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind, right? Now, a debased mind just means a foolish mind, right? So in other words, He gave them up to their shippiness and to do whatever that ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness. Now, we go into a list of different sins. Now, like I told you, Paul is addressing the sins that exist in Rome. Now, he's not given us the solution as yet. We will reach to the solution as we journey through the book of Romans. He's highlighting the sin condition. Because before we could ever have conviction and transformation, before we could even repent, there must be a conviction of the sin nature. So he's highlighting the sin nature to the church in Rome so that they can receive conviction and desire salvation. So we're going to get to salvation as we go through the book of Romans, but he's starting off by highlighting the sin, and he gives us a list. Now, this list, I want you to understand, is equivalent to the sin of homosexuality. Because if we're not careful in a religious mindset, we can start condemning people who are homosexuals, but then loving people that are adulterers. And God equivalates, if that's a word, all these different types of sin as the same. All are sin. So you would be very hypocritical as a Christian to embrace your brother who's a womanizer, but hate your sister who's a lesbian. Now, we should hate sin, but we should not hate the sinner. Because all of us have fallen short of the glory of God. All of us are sinners. And we all need the grace of God and the truth of God to repent. God can save the homosexual. God can save the adulterer. God can save the womanizer. God can save the liar. God can save the drunkard. All these are forms of sin that through God we can be redeemed and we can be made righteous and we can be transformed. Now, when we speak about sexual sin, yes, that is a little bit deeper rooted. However, God is able to transform even the desires that are evil into pure desires. So you may feel like your sexual desires are towards someone of the same gender. What I want you to know, if you're viewing this and you feel that way, that God is able to transform those desires into holy desires, into pure desires. That is how God works in our life. Just as a drunkard feels that addiction to alcohol, God is able to transform him from that addiction to where he's no longer addicted. Likewise, for these different types of sins. Now, here Paul goes on to give a list, right? So I want you to pay attention to this list, Christians. It's very important that you know that you are, when you read through this list, that you are abstaining and you are living a holy life. So here's the list that he gives, right? All these are sins that he highlights. They were filled with the manner of unrighteousness, evil. Number one, they were filled with covetousness. So that is wanting what somebody else have. That's going on Facebook or going on Instagram and seeing somebody else go on a trip to some part of the world. They go on vacation, they buy a new vehicle, and you want that, you desire that, and you start forcing your family to do those things. Why? Because you're trying to have that same lifestyle. So you start working harder and making more money because you want to have what somebody else have. So you're working overtime because you want to go on a trip to another part of the world. Why? Because they see your brother or your sister doing the same thing. That is covetousness, right? Malice, right? So evil words, trying to ill speak, gossiping, all of these fall under malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossipers, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil. Now, this is interesting, right? People actually invent new ways to be evil. And that's the society that we live in. Like, people are actually inventing new ways to be evil, to be sexually immoral, new ways to be against God. Like, every year that goes by, something new is coming up where as an invention of a way to hate God, right? A way to be against God. They're disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to what? To die. So those who practice sin deserve to die. Now, like I told you, we have not reached the solution. We are highlighting the sin. So those who practice sin, according to the law of God, deserve to die. In other words, they don't deserve eternal life. They don't deserve to live forever. They don't deserve to be in heaven. They don't deserve that life because of sin. Just like you and I. We don't deserve the life that God has given us. We don't deserve it. So he's saying that they don't deserve this. They deserve to die. They not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. Now, this last part is what we're going to dwell on just a little bit. This last part is what I'm going to challenge you with a little bit, right? Here's what they say. They do not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice them. So for the Christians right now, you may not be partaking in homosexuality. You may not be partaking in adultery. You may not be partaking in gossiping or slandering or deceit. You may not be involved in these types of sin. But here's what Paul is saying, right? Do not give approval to people who practice them. How do you give approval to practicing them? If you're a parent right now and your child is living in sin and they live under your roof, you are giving approval to them to practice it. Yeah. Because you are allowing them to continue in a lifestyle of sin while still caring for them, providing for them, covering them. Now, I'm not telling you to kick out your child as under 18, right? They are under your care. You have to mold them, shape them, provide grace. But you might have a bigger adult grown child, 25, 30, 45, that is a big man, a big woman, fully grown, fully matured, and they are living in sin, and you are approving that. You're approving. Not disproving is approving, right? So you might say, well, okay, well, I'm not approving it because I'm not partaking in it, or I'm not indulging in it. But the fact that you are not disproving it, that you're not drawing a line and saying, no, if you are going to live under my house, you can't be indulging in these types of sin, you are actually approving it. When you have friends that you hang out with and you talk to all the time, you laugh with all the time, you have a good time with them, and then they are covetous, they are malice, they are evil thinking, they are involved in different types of sin, and you are not practicing it with them, but at the same time, you don't disprove what they are doing. You don't actively say, hey, what you are doing is sinful. I need to separate from you in terms of distance myself emotionally. I need to distance myself in terms of how much I'm yoked together with you because what you are doing is sinful. Then you are as well giving approval to those who practice the types of sins that we just list. Now, while we are to offer grace and we are to be that light in the world and we are to be that salt in the world, we also must say the truth and stand by the truth and not compromise because we love people, because they are family, because they are friends, because we know them a long time. Now, we are not to be judgmental. We're not to be speaking down at people, right? We ought to offer them love, truth, and grace. When Jesus walked the face of the earth, he had a perfect balance between truth and grace. So he will tell you the truth, but he would offer you grace, that you can come to him and you can find redemption. He will tell you the truth, but he would say it in love. He would tell you the truth, but he would provide a miracle so that you can come out of that place of sin that you're in. And as Christians, we ought to do the same thing. We ought to stand by the truth, but we also ought to offer grace. We're not condemning people, right, to where, oh, you're a sinner, we don't want anything to do with you, go to hell. No, we're not condemning people. We are telling them the truth. Hey, you have sinned, but God provides grace that through Jesus Christ you can find redemption. And Paul will go to explain this doctrine of grace and salvation as we journey through the rest of the book of Romans. But today we highlight the aspect of sin. This brings us to the end of chapter 1. Next week, in our next installment, we continue in chapter 2. If you have not done it as yet, hit that like button, hit that share button, hit that subscribe button. Thank you for viewing this study and do enjoy the rest of your night. If you're viewing at night, do enjoy the rest of your day. If you're viewing a day, God bless you.